Hello friends, welcome back to the Jank Tank. This is bonus episode number 3. My name is Timothy Zaccanino. I'm going to be hosting with you, and I have on the line with me Teld. We're not going to go over all the usual intro stuff for our bonus episodes, which we reserve as a grab bag for different types of topics we really want to talk about. Maybe not even all cube-related topics, but we've got one today, kind of. And I will say here on the Jank Tank podcast, most of us like to be positive when we can.
We at least make the attempt, I try to talk and not rant.
We strive to have an air of positivity in the Magic community, but sometimes you have to really get on the soapbox and bring the hammer down, which is what we're going to do today. Presumably you've already seen the title of this video, whatever it ends up being, but we are going to rail on Murders at Karlov Manor Alchemy. And it's interesting because I personally have been a little bit of an alchemy apologist up until this point, to where I'm like, these cards aren't offensive, you don't have to play them, blah, blah, blah. But this recent batch just came out. It's 30 cards that are kind of like a supplementary add-on to Murders at Karlov Manor. They're obviously doing digital-only things, supposedly. And there's something that just really irks me about the cards that came out in this batch. And I'm trying to figure out what it is. Maybe that's what we're doing here, is trying to help Tim figure out why he hates this batch of cards so much and not the ones that came prior to it. So
no, I'm actually in the same boat. This is an interesting thing because I generally consider myself a bit of an alchemy apologist as well. While I do poo-poo it a little bit on power level, I've always said that I thought the idea of being able to create digital cards that utilize interesting space that can only be done online was really cool. But this set really bothers me. And like you said, it's like this is an episode to try to figure out why this bothers us so bad when normally we just roll our eyes and move on, or we, actively like occasionally some of the designs.
Yeah, almost all of these batches, it's always 30 cards. They always seem to have a handful of cards that are like, oh, that's actually really interesting, or I could find a space for that in this, novelty cube or whatever. But for whatever reason, we're going to talk about 3 cards we like here. It feels like so many of them in this batch are just doing offensive things or exist for the sole purpose of existing. I don't understand how they're still pumping these products out, because it doesn't seem to me like anybody likes them. So it's like, why are we now putting so much effort into making these alchemy cards that people aren't playing, people don't like, people don't want? And then the result is that you get the cards, these absolutely busted or convoluted cards that we're talking about today. And it's like, resources went into that. I guess that might be the bottom line that bothers me, is some amount of resource management went into designing these cards and generating art for these cards and tweaking them, supposedly. Maybe they weren't tweaked at all. And I'm like, well, that could have been time spent doing, a number of other things to improve the game we already have, rather than just forcing these alchemy things down our throat over and over and over again. I mean, do you know anybody who likes these things? I don't hear anybody saying they love alchemy cards and they're looking forward to the new batch of alchemy cards.
No, and to the contrary, what little bit of experience I've seen with newer players, there's been why are these cards so broken relative to what I've got? They don't realize that now they funnel you into the alchemy queue. That's a pretty offensive thing, I think, that they funnel people into alchemy instead of standard. There's a lot of concern around the nature of most of these cards being rares and mythics, putting extra drain on people who play formats like historic, because they tend to be extremely powerful. Though a lot of times they're in this awkward spot of not being, not every one of them is Diviner of Fates or Crucius that just completely warp a format. A lot of these cards are just powerful enough to completely unrail any limited game they're in without actually being good enough for constructed. And to me, those are the most offensive ones. I actually have less problem with a card like Crucius that's clearly meant to just be a constructed powerhouse than I do with some of the ones we're going to talk about today that just, they are really, really offensive. My favorite alchemy cards, the ones that I actually enjoy, are the more memey ones. So there's from the original set, there were stuff that would turn your things into food or let you reanimate something, but it became a 4/4 or something. There was these weird niche mechanics that were going on, and there were a lot of interesting designs over the time that they've done these where, you know, like drafting, I think there was the one that let you like draft a land into play or something that was reasonably cool. You know, some of these cards had cool mechanics to them, or at least interesting. Maybe not cool. Maybe I'm giving a little too much praise here because, you know, but like my point here is most of the ones in this set don't feel interesting. They just feel like hammers in search of nails, as we sometimes like to say.
Yeah, and Alchemy's in this awkward position where, like, the designers just, you can tell they're, like, desperate to get people to play the Alchemy cards, right? So they're like, okay, if we need the Alchemy cards to stand out, they have to be more powerful than the cards that people are already playing from the standard set. So let's just make them, like, do more things than the equivalent standard cards. So they just end up being these busted things. But then they also affect formats like Brawl. They affect formats like, I think Historic just has Alchemy cards filtered into it. The Alchemy format, like, put the Alchemy cards in the Alchemy format. Quit touching the other formats. When Arena Cube comes by, some of the cubes on Arena feature Alchemy cards, some actually don't. But, like, you can't avoid these if you play on Arena, if you play a lot of different formats, because they're just allowed in certain formats that it feels like they shouldn't be. Yeah, anyway, we've got a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, this isn't a comprehensive Alchemy rant. That video will be coming. No. This is more about this specific set and the problems. So any positivity you may expect to hear about Alchemy is now over. We are entering, this set makes us very, very angry. And when we do the Alchemy episode, maybe we'll have a little bit of goodwill to stretch to it, but that is not here.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. We will at some point actually get together, probably with Chris too, because he has strong feelings on this as well. We do want to do a comprehensive, like, this is how we feel about Alchemy, because we do have good things to say about a lot of different designs that had come out. But this ain't it. We ain't doing it here. That being said, the incorporate mechanic, maybe we should just mention that off the front, like, super convoluted.
It was, but I actually think that was like I actually put that in the tiniest bit of praise I will give for this
you
drop.
like incorporate. Okay, talk to me about it.
I only like it in the sense that it allows you to kind of build your own multicolor card, which I thought was kind of cool. Though, I will say, this doesn't really work in any sort of real multicolor deck, though, right? Because if you're playing a deck that relies on, like, for example, playing Niv Mizzet Reborn, right? And you're, like, trying to hit cards. It doesn't work with those. It doesn't work with a lot of the cards that would actually care about casting multicolor cards. I just thought it was an interesting way of making a multicolor card from a regular card. That was the one, like, little bitty thing I liked about it.
Mm-hmm. That's fair, and I've played a little bit of the Alchemy queues in the limited format, which is atrocious, but incorporate, it kind of just works, right? Like, you just choose a different monocolor card in your hand, you get, like, your first multicolor trigger, and then maybe you cast another multicolor spell down the line, you get some extra bonuses. The one thing I hate about it on Arena is that it displays the incorporated cost as part of the mana cost of the card, but it doesn't actually add to the mana cost of the card.
Wait. It doesn't change the converted mana cost?
No, it doesn't. And I thought it did. And I thought,
okay, never mind. This is stupid. Okay. I thought incorporate literally changed the mana value of the card for cards like Unearth and stuff. Though to be fair, this is not something that is unusual. Bite Down on Crime, for some reason, always shows up as a 2-mana card on Arena. But
I hate that.
We're not talking about that. Okay. Why don't we, Tim, take last bit of goodwill for people who are like, yeah, we like hearing positive Jank divers. Why don't we talk about the handful of cards that we do like? Because there's not many.
Yeah, so there's 3 of them. I'm going to let you talk about the last one. Okay, and I just want to pause and reiterate. There are 30 cards in this batch, and we have good things to say about 3 of them. One of them is literally just Woodland Investigation, which is a green mana sorcery. It's an uncommon. You search your library for a basic, and it becomes a clue. Like, it's just permanently a clue. Very inoffensive card. In fact, I'm kind of excited for this for Affinity Cube, and this is the type of thing that's kind of cool with Alchemy, is like, you can do that perpetual change. I could see them making an Enchantress version of this, right, where you go fetch up a basic and make it an enchantment. It's like, okay, That's kind of cool, that's synergistic, but whatever, throw it out the window. There's also a rare sorcery called Relics of the Rubble Belt, and I'm actually going to put this in the bad category now for a reason I'll get to, but what this does is it's 2 and a green for a sorcery. You draft 2 cards from the Relic of the Rebel Belt spellbook, and then you can put 1 on the battlefield and 1 in your hand, and they're all signets. They're all the guild signets. So this is kind of like a cultivate that just generates actual cards. Like, it's actually kind of a neat card. It also makes 2 artifacts instead of, like, finding 2 lands, so it's kind of like clever way of making a cultivate that generates artifacts.
Why is this a rare?
I don't know, but my problem with it is that it means the signets exist on Arena. They're coded on Arena, and they won't give them to. Like, this is another thing with Alchemy, is sometimes they'll code in these really classic, cool cards like Tropical Island and Ponder, and you know they exist on the Arena client, but they're not actual cards. They're part of a drafted spell book, so you can't, like, put them in your cubes and stuff. So I'm actually going to take this off the good list and put it on the naughty list for that reason.
Okay. So I'm going to preface this last one as not one that I'm particularly high on, but it was mentioned by a couple of members of our community that was at least cool and interesting, and I will give them that it is at least interesting. So it is, I think you say, is it Veko or Vico?
I don't know, Vico. The name doesn't matter. They'll just change it down the line.
Yeah, okay, yeah. It's Death's Doorkeeper. It is white and a black for a 1/3 legendary spirit cleric creature. It has Extort, which if you are a newer Magic player means that when you cast a spell, you can pay a black or a white mana and drain your opponent for 1. In addition to that, you can tap and sacrifice a non-spirit creature, return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. It perpetually becomes a spirit, except it's a 1/1, and it does not gain flying, and gains you may pay white-black rather than pay this spell's mana cost. Activate as a sorcery. So this card is interesting because it allows you to kind of do some loops where you're like sacking creatures on your board to buy back creatures out of your graveyard. It makes them cheap, but it also makes them small, and you're getting extort triggers while you're doing that. There's a lot of cards you don't want to pick up with this. So for example, something like Akazats is a really sketchy card to grab out of this because it takes away most of the value of the card. It could be interesting with something like Grave Titan, like 1 mana Grave Titan is a 1/1 that makes 2 2/2s for 1 mana, good deal. This is one of those cases in Alchemy where you're never quite sure if the card is completely degenerately busted or unplayably bad. And Alchemy cards, for whatever reason, oftentimes straddle that line. And usually they're busted, but it's sometimes hard to tell.
Yeah, usually when you have to flip the coin on busted or not, the answer's just busted. And this is the type of thing where you play it on turn 2, you could pitch an Atraxa, sacrifice a thing, bring back Atraxa to your hand, cast it for 1 mana, and sure, it's a 1/1 Atraxa, but it's still going to draw you 6 cards or whatever. So I'm going to assume busted, but you have to put work into it to make it busted. It is kind of a cool mini reanimator thing. And I mean that literally. It makes little mini versions of the things you're reanimating, and you have to jump through a few hoops for it. So it's kind of cool. People are like, "Oh, this might be, timeless queue playable." And I'm like, "Yeah, perhaps."
Yeah, probably. The real, it lives or dies by the triggers, but a lot of Magic cards these days are like that, so I don't really think that is too big of an ask. I mean, and some cards, for example, if you pick up a Blade Splicer with this, it just makes your Blade Splicer 1 mana.
Mm-hmm. Well, that, and with creatures that make their own bodies, you mentioned Grave Titan's Blade Splicer, you can't sacrifice a spirit, so you can't sacrifice the creature you brought back, but you can sacrifice the bodies they make to keep bringing that creature back, right? So, you could sacrifice the zombie tokens off of Grave Titan to just keep getting Grave Titan back.
Well, in addition, remember, as I mentioned at the beginning of it has Extort, so every time you're doing this loop, you could also spend extra mana that you have laying around to drain your opponent, buying you more time to keep looping and wearing your opponent down.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so that's all the good, right? No more good here, all bad from here on out?
Yep. It's all design mistakes all the way down.
So our first category here are insanely overpowered cards, ? And the question mark is not are these insanely overpowered? It's why are these insanely overpowered? And this first one is just insane. It's Emporium Thopterist, 1 in a blue for a 1/1 uncommon Vidalcan Artificer. It says Thopters you control get +2/+0. At the beginning of your upkeep, conjure a card named Ornithopter into your hand, and that's the 0 mana 0/2 artifact creature. I guess the thought process is, you're just getting a bunch of Ornithopters. But first off, they're 2/2 Ornithopters because this thing pumps them. Second off, even if this didn't pump Thopters, wouldn't that be broken?
I don't know about broken, but it does make a bunch of cardboard.
Yeah, so the thing we've noticed, we've noticed this trend, and it seems to happen on uncommons more than rares and mythics for some reason, is any of the alchemy cards that regularly conjure things over and over again are insane. like Xander's Wake, the one that conjures a shitty vampire card to your hand whenever a creature dies. Insane. Celestial Vault takes a little bit of work. It can be aggroed down, but it makes these mythic rare angels and stuff like that.
Turns out, doesn't even have to be cards that generate into your hand. There's a couple of them from, I think, Brothers War that generated cards into your graveyard. And there was one that we watched an entire queue of a Desert Cube just get completely crushed by this like random 4/4 alchemy that makes cards into your graveyard. And then if you get enough cards in your graveyard, lets you cast cards from your graveyard.
Yeah, the Chitinous Crawler.
Yeah, card just like took over like every game we saw it in. And it doesn't even conjure cards into your hand. It conjures them into your graveyard.
I don't understand how these keep slipping through at uncommon. Like, I don't get it. Like, this is clearly a value engine. Like, and like you said, maybe it wouldn't be broken if it didn't pump the Thopters too, but generating a card in your hand every turn, some decks will take that without even caring what the card is.
Yeah, like, keep in mind, artifacts are also one of the cards types that get into a density of artifacts is just inherently powerful in any deck that wants them, right? If you're able to get those cards going, they're going to be powerful. It's not hard. And even like, okay, just for an example, Reckless Detective. And I think there's one at Common that also allows you to sack an artifact to draw a card. But like something like that, just cashing in these Ornithopters for drawing a card every turn. Or, there's all sorts of little synergies you can very easily break with a card that's just giving you an actual piece of cardboard on every single turn of the game.
Yeah, I like some of the alchemy designs that conjure like bad cards. So like one of my favorites is Dragonfly Pilot. It makes a Dragonfly suit. Dragonfly suit's an awful card, but it comes attached to like a different body. So it's like, oh, I get to play with this really bad card. It's repurposed in this way that makes it like actual playable. And you kind of see that going here, but I only like them when they like make the card and that's it. This just keeps pumping out cardboard into your hand every turn, and it's a 2-mana 1/1 like.
Yeah, this would be like a Dragonfly Pilot, like when you crewed the Dragonfly suit, it gave it like +2/+0 or something in first strike, just
yeah,
like,
and
really,
then you made another Dragonfly suit every turn, like.
Yeah, exactly. Like Dragonfly Pilot is on the short list of alchemy cards that I really, really like, but this card is very silly.
It's definitely an outlier. You want to take this Guild Pack Greenwalker here?
Oh, good lord. Okay, so Guild Pack Greenwalker is, first of all, is a 3-mana 4/4. In a set with 3-mana 2/2s being the main thing you're playing. All right, so when it ETBs, you may choose a creature card in your hand. When you do, you incorporate 1 and a green, so you add 1 and a green to its cost, and it gets +4/+4.
Perpetually,
rest of the game. If you pick it back up, reanimate it, anything gets bigger. Multicolor creatures you control also have Ward 2. And keep in mind that if you incorporate it onto a non-green card, it now has Ward 2 while this is in play. This is a gigantic body that generates another gigantic body and then slaps Ward on it for good times.
Just insane. Like, this card's insane. And I didn't realize this, and Mop tried to test this out and it wouldn't let him do it. But in the limited format, you can choose a disguise creature in your hand and then just play it face down, ignore the extra cost altogether, and then flip it up, and it'll just have +4/+4. Like, you can just
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. No, and Mop was like, I don't think that works. He tried it out with Sparky. It wouldn't let him do it. But then we watched it happen in a game with Roja. I watched this happen in my game. Someone played this Guild Pack Greenwalker on turn 3, and then turn 4 played a face down Nervous Gardener and flipped it up as a 6/6. And it was
Holy
like,
cow.
Why? Shouldn't you have to pay the extra to morph it face down? Just nonsense. I don't know. Could this have been a 2/2? I think this would have been a 2/2. I would have been like, wow, that's really strong. As it stands, it's just like a big question mark. Why is this so good, Yeah,
it's important to note that this is a set that is, in particular, and again, no one is forcing you to play Alchemy. I don't play the Karlov Alchemy for obvious reasons. But if you are one of the insane people playing it, this is a card that is just absolutely massive in this format. This format revolves around like 2/2s and 3/1s and like little dorky creatures. And this just outsizes all of them. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, but there's nothing in the main set that's this pushed on stat lines, right?
No, there's no way. Like, the majority of games start off with somebody playing a 2-mana 2-power creature into a 3-mana 2-power creature. This just trumps everything.
Yeah, and that's in addition to the even bigger creature that it gives you. Like, that's the other thing, right? Is you put this on like a fairy snoop, right? Or any sort of flyer creature. You put this on the, oh my lord, if you put this on the 1 in a white for the 1/1 detective with flying and lifelink, how do you lose?
Somebody showed me a screenshot of them putting this ability in constructed on Bloodghast, and then just pitching the Bloodghast to the graveyard, but it's just like a 6/5 Bloodghast forever. And I was like, oh my god. So yeah, anyway, this is like clear, like, oh, they're trying to make a super powerful card, like, in a completely inelegant way.
All right, next up we have Massacre Worm, but better.
Massacre Worm, Alchemy Massacre Worm. So Perforator Crocodile, which, by the way, I want to say is a really dumb name. Like, I get perforation means like to punch holes in something, but like when I think perforation, I think of those little notebooks where you have to like tear out on the perforated line, and I'm like, that's so gentle. But this card is 3 black for a 6/5 mythic crocodile. When it enters the battlefield, for each creature your opponents control, conjure a stab wound attached to that creature. And stab wound is the aura that gives a creature -2/-2, and its controller loses 2 life at the beginning of their upkeep. This also has cycling for some reason.
That way when you don't have 3 black, you can just get rid of it and get another card that you want.
We just can't have our expensive cards not always do something. Like, they always have to have a way to fall back on, like, whatever. So yeah, Massacre Worm, but like better than Massacre Worm, right? Because if your opponent has a bunch of 3/3s, it just stab wounds all of them.
Yes. Also, okay, a couple of things that I have serious issues with this card. First of all, stab wound was on the Woe bonus sheet. This was supposed to be Woe Alchemy. Okay, if this was a Woe Alchemy
had to
card,
have been.
I would be annoyed if this was a Woe Alchemy card. I would think it was just as dumb. But at least it would make some degree of sense that it might conjure stab wounds, right? But on top of that, like, this is a set that revolves around 2/2s. This is intended to wipe your opponent's board of all the morphs and little dinky creatures they have in a format that is demanding you play small dinky creatures. Like,
and I know I gripe a little bit that there aren't good answers to red-white in the format, but like, can you imagine playing this against Dogwalker? It completely one-sided hoses your opponent's board, and any big creatures are now smaller permanently and shoot your opponent for damage. Like, just this is like an insane version of Massacre Worm.
Now, I will say, this card, unlike some of the other alchemy cards, this one does have an actual cost, right? Putting 3 black sources into your deck, even as good as the fixing is in this format, is not easy.
Compared to Vein Ripper, right? Like, same deal.
Yeah. These cards are very difficult to cast in this format because your decks are almost always base white or base green and not really able to facilitate it. But the hoop you have to jump through is still worth it. I will jack my mana up to be able to cast this.
Oh, well, this one buys you out too. You could just cycle it away if you really need to. So
right.
Also, there's like an actual reanimate in the set that never gets played, but you would probably play it with this, like, just instant speed, bring this thing back to the battlefield.
Yeah, there's another reanimate that does see play.
There's also, we just talked about Vico too. All right, so yeah, that one feels like very out of place for this set. Is kind of the big thing that catches me off guard. Like, it's not doing any of the things that this set is doing, and it's referencing a card that feels like it should have been in a different set anyway. But here's a quick one that, like, I was like, oh yeah, alchemy. So Scrutiny of the Guild Pact is 1 in a white for an uncommon enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature card in your hand. It perpetually incorporates white and gains the ability, when you cast this spell, make a 2/2 white and blue detective creature. So you choose a creature in your hand, you add white to its mana cost, and when you cast that for its full mana cost, you will make a detective token. So kind of the detective is on a delay. It also has the static ability, multicolored creatures you control get +1/+1. So when I first read this card, I was like, you know what? That's actually pretty tame, right? You're going to get a 2/2 on a delay, and then you're going to pump your multicolored creatures, but it's like, wait, there's something more to this. You play this card out, and what actually happens is you get a 3/3, because the detective is a multicolored creature, and you probably also changed one of your other creatures into a multicolored creature, so that's getting +1/+1, and you pump any other multicolored creatures you control, which includes the detectives you already control. So this is very often like delayed by a turn, but a total of 3 mana for something like 5 or 6 power on board, which is just insane again.
Yeah, this one has the very minor downside of being a bad top deck, I guess, but like,
Yeah. You know, it's fine. Like this, I only wanted to point this one out, not because it's like, oh, that's so insane, but it's like, no, this is how alchemy cards play out. They're always do way more than you think they will.
Yep.
Is it polarizer?
Yes, this is a bit of a polarizing card. People had some strong opinions about this one.
It sure was. So to read the card, Is It Polarizer is blue-red for a 2/1. It's a rare Viashino wizard. When it dies, you conjure a card named Ionize or a card named Electrolyze into your hand. Ionize is a 3-mana counterspell that deals 2 damage to the spell's controller. Electrolyze is 3 mana for an instant that lets you split up 2 damage between any targets, and it cantrips and draws a card. And the card is very powerful, but somebody in, I think it was Drix, where I'm talking to you, Drix. Drix was like, why is this card rare? Wouldn't this be fine at uncommon? And I was just immediately like, are you serious? Like, do you want to play against cards like this at uncommon? They're like, it's a 2/1 that dies into like a mediocre card. And I was like, first off, Electrolyze is like not really a mediocre card. It's a pretty good card in most situations. Second off, you're getting that card for free off of a 2/1 that likely traded for a removal spell or a creature. And third off, you have flexibility. If you're ahead, you can just pick up Ionize instead. If you're behind, you can pick up Electrolyze. Like, when all is said and done, if you trade this for a creature and then you pick up Electrolyze and you snipe another 2/2 and you draw a card off Electrolyze, that's just a straight up 3-for-1 for 5 mana. And it broke it up into 2 different payments. You pay 2 and 3 instead of 5 altogether. I think that's an extremely powerful card.
Every part of this Buffalo also impacted the board. So this isn't like a 5 mana Jace's Ingenuity 3-for-1, right? This is we've played to the board and drew cards. And like you said, if you're ahead, this gives you a hard counter. There are no hard counters in this set.
No, there aren't. And the question, somebody was like, is that even really that good? Like, if you do all that, like, you paid 5 mana, you probably killed 2 things. I was like, first off, 5 mana to kill 2 things is probably okay, but can you imagine you're the person who plays, like, Savannah Lions on turn 1, and then your opponent plays this on turn 2, and you're like, okay, not only is this going to trade for my Savannah Lions, but they're going to get an Electrolyze to their hand and just snipe off 2 more 1/1s and replace that card? Like, this deserves to be a rare, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't one of the most egregious cards because it doesn't just win the game like some of the other ones do, but it is an extremely powerful value card that and again, the context of the format, all of your opponents, every single one of them will be playing some number of 2/2s.
Yeah, and if they're not, you pick up Ionize.
Yeah,
you know?
Well, I just mean in terms of the body. Like, there's some formats where this 2/1 body for 2 mana wouldn't be particularly relevant. This is not one of them. This is going to trade for a card.
Yeah. So talk to me about the next one, because we almost put this in the good things to say category, but I think it is just kind of horribly broken.
Yeah, so this is Case of the Lost Witness. It's 1 and a blue for an enchantment case. When it ETBs, you conjure 4 Fibblethip the Losts into your library and then shuffle and draw a card. So Fibblethip the Lost is the 1 and a blue for a 1/1 legendary homunculus that draws a card when it enters play, and it has some text about if you get it from your library, you draw 2 cards, I think. In any case, you solve this case when you control a legendary homunculus. Now, keep in mind, we just added 4 legendary homunculus to our deck and drew a card, so this cycled for 2 mana, right? Which is a really, really good floor. And then once it's solved, you may look at the top card of your library at any time and play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. And for those who aren't paying attention at home, every card in your deck will either be a land or a spell that you can cast. So there was, in a long time ago, a card called Future Sight that was a 5 mana, 2 blue enchantment that had the same text.
Yeah, 5 mana. And that card's still kind of like good. Future Sight's still decent.
Right. So this card was funny, meme, haha, we're making Fibbletips. We're like getting a case with Fibblethip. We're looking for him. I love the flavor of this card. But this thing's broken, right? Like, putting 4 Fibbletips into your average 40 card deck is going to, I don't want to do the geometric math here, but like, once you account for that, you're very, very likely to draw one, relatively quickly. Every draw step you have something, you're going to have better than like a 15% chance of every draw step finding your Fibblethip. And as soon as you find your Fibblethip, your opponent has a removal spell or they lose the game, is essentially what this says. You can't, it is basically
instant speed.
Yeah. If you played Neo Kamigawa and had drafts with the reality chip, It kind of had that vibe of like once you equip the reality chip to a creature, you just couldn't lose because you were playing like 3 cards from the top of your deck every turn. That's kind of the same thing. You just almost can't lose. Like you generate so much value. But this one doesn't require the hoop that you're having to jump through here isn't anything bad because like also the Fibblethip drew you a card, right? Even if they kill your Fibblethip, you just keep playing the game until you draw another Fibblethip.
Well, the thing too is if they kill your Fibblethip, the Fibblethip shuffles back into your library, right? Because that's what happens when you target it.
I actually forgot that it does that.
Well, not only that, but you also have the up the beanstalk thing where this just draws a card for 2 mana and then sets you up for your later stuff. But also you kind of mentioned it as throwaway text that Fibblethip draws 2 cards if it entered from your library. But once you've solved this, if you hit another Fibblethip on top, you just cast that Fibblethip and it draws 2 cards.
Oh, wow, yeah. Like this is what we meant, right? Alchemy cards are always more busted than they sound. I just didn't even think about that.
Yeah, and like maybe that's intentional, maybe it's not, but every additional Fibblethip you draw after you've solved this case is worth 3 cards on its own because you got it for free off the top of your library and it draws 2 extra cards.
Yeah, insane card, just gonna like turbo through your deck.
I think this card would have been way cooler and obviously like significantly weaker if it just shuffled 1 Fibblethip into your library and it's like, oh, that's the Fibblethip who's lost. Plus, and we didn't even mention this, you can just have other Fibblethips in your deck. Like if you're playing constructed,
there shouldn't be 4 Fibblethips to loss, right? There's only 1 Fibblethip to find. This card should conjure 1 Fibblethip. And then honestly, they probably could have pushed it slightly more somewhere else on the card. I don't know what you would do with it. Maybe like Scrytooth and draw a card or something like that. That would, I mean, obviously it'd be very, very good if it did that. But you know, the flavor fail there of just not having exactly 1 Fibblethip was enough to bump it down because it also makes the card egregiously broken.
That does leave us with a character I don't know. I don't know if Furquol is a named Ravnican character I'm supposed to know or not, but did you want to go ahead and talk about the Quag Nurturer?
Yeah, this card made me irrationally upset. So this is Furquol Quag Nurturer. It is 2 black-green for a 2/4 legendary elf shaman. At the beginning of your end step, conjure a card named Slimy Dual Leech onto the battlefield if you control no leeches. Otherwise, put a +1 counter on each leech you control. Tap, sacrifice a creature. Add an amount of green equal to the sacrificed creature's power. So, this card mostly bothered me, not because it's egregiously broken, though it is very, very powerful. It bothered me because Slimy Dual Leech is a 4-mana card that is literally in the set, and this just is is like a second Slimy Dual Leech. It like you play your 2/4 and then you get a Slimy Dual Leech for free. Except if they ever kill it, you also get another Slimy Dual Leech. And also you can sacrifice your Slimy Dual Leech to ramp you. It just like the number of knobs on this card just really bother me. Like this is a card that conjures another card from the set, but better. Like, I don't know. This is lame.
It's inelegant. Plus, like, this is a baseline 4 mana for
like 4/8
2 4/4s.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's insane. And then you could sacrifice. So what is it? Otherwise, put a +1 counter on each leech you control. Sure, so you can grow the leeches over time. It also just taps for 2 mana, kind of for free, because you just get your Slimy Dual Leech back. This is stupid. Like, I don't know what nook this is trying to, like, fit into. Like I said, I like the cards that conjure otherwise pretty dorky cards, like Slimy Dual Leech isn't a breadwinner or anything like that. It's just an okay card. And I would like a card that conjured a Slimy Dual Leech, but this one just kind of keeps doing it over and over again.
Yeah, it also conjures it into play. It'd be one thing if it just like put one into your hand. I wouldn't really have a problem with it.
Yeah, you just get the Dual Leech for free. Like you're just getting a 4-mana card for free off of this, while this card is also just being a Slimy Dual Leech. So this is like peak, like inelegant kind of, we made a card because we could design. It's not like filling any sort of niche. It's not even that interesting. Like Quag Nurturer is feeding leeches. I guess that's a thing. I hate it too. That does bring us to cards that are maybe not like hyper powerful, but this is the like insanely wordy category or unnecessarily wordy category that makes me just like not care about the card because of the words that are on it. I'm going to read this first one, and then we're just going to ignore what it does because it's stupid, but Snarlfang Vermin is a single black mana for an uncommon 2/1 rat. When Snarlfang Vermin deals combat damage to a creature, if that creature is still on the battlefield, suspect that creature. it perpetually gains this ability. Whenever a suspected creature an opponent controlled dies while snarlfang vermin is in your graveyard, that opponent loses a life. So without getting too far into it, this has to attack into something. The opponent has to consciously block it, and their creature has to survive, which means you just kind of threw this into like a 3/3 or something, and then their creature becomes suspected, and then when that dies, they lose a life. Like, what are we doing here? Why is this a design? Is this cool? Does this make Rakdos better in limited? Is it cool for constructed? It's convoluted.
The most compelling thing about this card is a 1-mana 2/1. Like,
yeah, that's it. Like, so much text for like essentially nothing. Whoever has just flung their 2/1 into a 3/3 for no reason. Like, you just don't do that.
Like, and then the creature that it hits gets the ability, and then this has to be in the graveyard, which of course it is, but like why? This card makes no sense.
Why does it matter that it suspects another creature, which is either going to cut off that creature's ability to even like receive or take damage, or maybe the idea is like, you throw this into a 3/3, the 3/3 becomes suspected. The 3/3 attacks you, you block it with 2 2/2s, and one of those survives combat. Except your opponent could also just assign all of the damage to... Anyway, this card is just... I hate to keep using the word inelegant, but that's what it is, right? Like, it's not cool, it's trying to tell this story, and it just does not succeed. Like, this looks like Trash Rat to me.
Yeah, I think the flavor is you get bit by the rat and you get some sort of plague but like the suspect mechanic is supposed to be like you're suspected of committing a crime. So like it doesn't even make sense on a flavor that like a rat bite gives you a disease and that makes you suspected of a crime.
Yeah, I don't like, and the art's like the rat's like whispering someone's ear. He's like, "Hey man, like do it," or something. Like I don't understand. There's no flavor text, like just stupid. Juggle the performance. So this one's actually not like super offensive, but this is 1 black-red for a mythic rare sorcery. And just to read it, each player discards their hand, then conjures a duplicate of each of 7 random cards from the library of the player to their right into their hand. The duplicates perpetually gain mana of any type, can be spent to cast this spell. So first off, like the Twitter exploded when they saw this card because they're like, "Oh, is this confirmation that commanders come in? Like, are they gonna make 4-player commander?" And it's like, no, no. Like, why would you think that? Because player to the right, like this is clearly them just trying to like maintain the templating of normal Magic cards because that's how this would be worded in a paper Magic card. But also like, if this is a digital only card, can't you just make the text not stupid? Can't you just like make an exception and say what this card does without being so roundabout about it? Like just say that you conjure 7 cards from your opponent's library. We get it. It's digital only. It's not going to affect the paper things. People will understand how it works. Like so convoluted text. I hate it.
Yeah, this is, I mean, I don't know if there was an elegant way to word this, but putting it to the player of your right, it does sort of feel like they're trying to like seed the idea of multiplayer in, if for nothing else than to cause drama, because they had to know what they were doing, right? You don't release this card with that specific set of words without knowing what you're going to cause, like what kind of suspicion you're going to cause. We are almost done with the first page of our notes. So there's Ominous Lockbox for 1 and a blue for an artifact clue at rare. When it ETBs, you secretly choose a number between 1 and 20. When an opponent casts a spell with mana value equal to the chosen number, sacrifice Ominous Lockbox. If you do, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. 2, sacrifice Ominous Lockbox, draw a card.
Why in the hell would I ever pick the number 18? Why is it 1 to 20?
Yeah, like, why does it not just choose a number? Like, also, the most expensive card in Magic is 15 mana, right? It's Mommy Emrakul?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess X spell. Can you imagine you pick 20, the one time and your opponent like makes their X spell 21 or something?
Oh, okay, I know what you do with it. Okay, so you cast, you play this, right? You thought seize your opponent, so that way you know they have an X spell. Then you Mana Flare. Then you ominous lockbox to name their X spell and name it for the most mana they'll be able to make. Then you cast your SOI Spaghetti Mom, not the 15 mana one, but the 13, Delirium one. You take control of your opponent's next turn and then cast their big expensive spell.
Ooh,
and copy it so that you can kill them.
This is Mindslaver tech. I got it. Okay. Okay. This card is like, this isn't good. A super offensive design, but like,
this is actually a bad card.
Yeah, like you pick 4 and you hope your opponent casts a 4-drop or something like that. It's also not even really that good in limited because you're going to name 3 like very often, but if your opponent casts a 3-drop morph creature, you just get a 2/2 colorless creature. You don't copy the front half of it.
Okay, I'm sorry. This is an alchemy card, and we can't just conjure a copy of what our opponent casts. Like, what's the point of it being an alchemy card if we?
The only thing making this an alchemy card is secretly choose a number, which is bogus because we have a Killer Among Us, which makes us secretly choose a creature type.
Yeah, this is literally a paper card.
Yeah, there's nothing about this that feels like it's an alchemy-only design. Garbo.
Also, this is one of the rare times where I kind of wish they'd push this a little bit, because, like, this card, even when you get it, is not good, right? Like, you play this, and, like, say you name 4, and you getting a 4-drop. It's not like you countered your opponent's 4 on the way down, right? Like, they still got their 4-drop. You just, like, kept parity, but you're down 2 mana.
Also, the fact that it's a clue is, like, kind of offensive, because I don't... Why would I ever want to sacrifice this if this is what I'm doing? Like... if you ever have to sacrifice it because it's a clue, it's because like something went horribly wrong, right?
Yeah.
You picked the wrong number and your opponent never cast a spell of that number. Yeah, you picked 17 and you're like, guess I'll sack this because it's not doing anything.
Okay, I need to correct myself because I just said something dumb. I said that if you cast this on 4 and then your opponent plays a 4-drop, you're just down 2 mana. You don't have to pay for the 4 mana, so you actually are up 2 mana. You got a tempo advantage and kept board present, so that's fine. But I just want to correct myself, like, in case somebody listening is like, well, actually...
Yeah, the one ominous lockbox enthusiast out there. Okay, let's go ahead and blast through the rest of these complicated cards. So a Lurking Spine Crawler is 3 and a black for a 5/4. It's an uncommon horror. It's a 4-mana 5/4 in black for some reason. When it enters the battlefield, choose a non-land card in your hand. If you do, it perpetually incorporates 1 in a black and gains whenever you cast this spell, each opponent sacrifices a creature, each opponent who can't discards a card. Very inelegant. Once again, whenever you cast a multicolored spell, for each of that spell's colors, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. So 4 mana 5/4 adds 2 mana to your next spell, probably makes it multicolored. You cast it, your opponent sacks a creature, and you drain them for 2 life. On top of a 4 mana 5/4.
I was gonna say, the biggest thing on this card is that it trades for your opponent's green 5 and 6 drops as a black 4 mana black card.
Concert Kaboomist, 1 red for a 4/2 uncommon Goblin Artificer with Trample and Disguise for red. When it enters the battlefield or is turned face up, it deals X damage to target opponent, where X is the number of non-creature spells you've cast since the beginning of your last turn.
I was going to say this is pretty good with the guy that makes Ornithopters, but that doesn't actually work.
No, non-creature spells. It's also like, what is this doing in this set? Like, red-blue does not care. It's kind of, what's that case? The really bad blue case that's like, if you cast 4 instants or sorceries,
yeah,
you solve it. And it's like, that's not what blue-red is doing. Did you guys not get the memo that blue-red is not a non-creature spell deck in this format?
What happened with this card is originally, this card was supposed to be in another set. It was a 3 mana 4/2 trampler. When it enters the battlefield, it would say at the beginning of gain an emblem with like at the end of your next end step, deal damage to your opponent equal to, and they changed it to a disguise card. That way they could fit it, because this card just doesn't fit at all.
It's not like this card's horrendously bad or anything like that. It's just like, why is it in this set? It's not doing anything thematic with the rest of the set. I guess it has disguise.
Yeah.
It's a cheap disguise creature.
End of the day, it pushes damage. It's like, a 4/2 trampler is like kind of fine for 3 mana.
Yeah. The next one's like almost cool. Like it's again, not a super offensive card, but Case of the Market Melee is 1 in a red. When this case enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to any target, and it has a static ability of damage isn't removed from creatures during cleanup steps. To solve it, 3 or more creatures are damaged. So on the end step, there have to be 3 creatures on board that have marked damage on them but aren't dead somehow. Like, I get that this deals 1, but like you had to have like had 2 other creatures engage in combat and survive, which doesn't ever happen. And then when it's solved, it does a lot of damage when you attack. But like, how do you solve this?
I was gonna say, this might actually be harder to solve than the black one that makes a Gorgon.
Is the idea I'm supposed to ping one thing and then throw like my shocks at 3/3s or something like that just to get this solved? Or I attack my 2/2s into my opponent's 3/3s?
Yeah, I'm assuming the idea is there's a like the green decks in this format play a bunch of 1/3s as their defensive creatures typically. And so maybe like we're attacking into those with our morphs and we're marking like 2 points of damage on them and 1 point on our morph. It doesn't really help us, but I guess it like lets us push past them on a future turn and like threatens to flip it.
Yeah, maybe. I think the thing I like about this is that the format could actually use more pinging effects. Mm-hmm. So it's like actually kind of feeling a niche. But if you're pinging off an X1, you're certainly not working towards solving this case, and that's probably okay. But these effects that like keep damage around on Alchemy just seem like they never matter. They've done that a couple times on past cards, and it's felt like filler text to me.
Okay, so that's the end of the extremely wordy section. Now for the ones that really make us mad.
Why are these alchemy cards? I guess we could have put in the lockbox here, but I didn't really register that that's not really an alchemy card at all. We do have a couple here. It's a smaller category, but Thought String Analyst is up first, blue and black, for a 2/2 rare human wizard. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of target opponent's library face down. You lose life equal to its mana value. You may look at and play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell. So you Dark Confidant your opponent's library. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the only thing that makes this a remotely alchemy-only card is that it does not reveal what the card is, but you still lose the life, right?
Yeah, that's correct. You could just print this card in paper and have it reveal it face up, right? And you just get a
side you would just exile the card face up, and that's it.
And like, I don't think anybody would blink if they printed that card.
They're like, oh, we have this cool design, but it's not really an alchemy-only thing. Let's just make it do something face down instead. Boom, alchemy card.
Also, I have a serious issue that this card is a wizard and not a detective. That feels like a big fail.
I was just noticing that. He's got the detective hat, but he's not a detective. This is nonsense.
Yeah, gigantic fail on that one.
What do we have with Shove Aside?
So, Shove Aside is red for a sorcery and uncommon. If you aren't the starting player, you may cast it as though it had flash. Shove Aside deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. I actually am probably going to make the case that we should be playing this in the unrestricted cube over Strangle, just because it allows you to catch up if you're behind. But the thing is Strangle's already so efficient that it's like already really good at catching you up from behind. So I don't actually know if it's necessary.
It might not be, especially if like the goal is to have as minimal alchemy influence as possible in cubes. Yeah. Me and you in particular, we actually like these designs that are like, if you weren't the starting player, your card gets slightly better. They've done that in the past, and it actually makes for some interest in alchemy design space because that's an actual use of digital-only mechanics to improve the game. You know, everybody knows being on the play, it gives you a significant advantage, so making your cards better on the draw helps you fight that. That being said, like, Strangle's already a good card. Like, Strangle's just as good as a sorcery as it is as an instant, obviously a little bit worse. Plus, this doesn't do anything significant if you are on the play, so...
Yeah. I have 2 major problems with this card, or with this design. Firstly is that if you aren't the starting player thing, that should just be able to be a paper mechanic. I'm sorry, but if with some of the things that you're expected to remember on memory issues inside the game, including things like Day-Night, including things like A Killer Among Us that have secret text, why are we not able to mark the player who started the game? Like, why is that too big of a leap to remember when we have other cards that do things that are far more convoluted and hard to keep track of?
Yeah, I mean, I get it, because it's like mental upkeep to track something that people aren't used to tracking, and I could foresee it being a problem in like paper tournament Magic, but if you're playing a card like let's just say Shove Aside is a paper card, and you're playing that, you should probably just already be making the mental note who was the active player, right? Like, you're playing the card where it matters, so like keep track of that, you know?
Right. My other problem with this card is it's literally power crept on Strangle, and like I actually think I would have liked this card to be a little bit better, actually, and it just be a deal 3 to anything that upgrades to Lightning Bolt when you're on the draw. I actually would have liked that better simply because it wouldn't be as a power crept lightning bolt. But it could be as good as lightning bolt instead of just, it still would be a strictly better strangle, but I probably wouldn't feel as bad about it because it wouldn't have literally the text of strangle on it, which annoys me for some reason.
Yeah. I've also noticed in the alchemy queues, it doesn't really like matter. I mean, it's good. It's like sometimes better. It's better than like a galvanize most of the time, but red already just has good removal. So it's like adding another option to the removal suite, but it's not really like improving red stock that this is here when you already have shock, galvanize, torch the witness, stuff like that. So maybe this is a constructed player. Like I could definitely see this scene play in alchemy queues or historic or whatever, but it's just kind of a boring design that could be a paper card and doesn't really feel super unique. So that's it for Shove Aside. There's 2 more cards in this category. Cackling Observer, which people like just really want us to play for some reason. This is 1 black for a rare imp. It's a 3/1 flyer, so 1 black 3/1 flyer is okay. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals each non-land card in their hand. You choose one of those cards and exile it. When Cackling Observer leaves the battlefield, the exiled card's owner seeks a non-land card with lesser mana value than the exiled card. So you've got kind of a...
Thought Not Demon?
Yeah, Thought Not Demon. You know, Elite Spellbinders, kind of similar. Like, this does have alchemy text in the sense that, like, your opponent doesn't reveal their entire hand. They seek a card instead of getting their original card back, but, like...
This could have with just a couple of tweaks, this could have been a ready-to-print card. You know, you reveal your opponent's entire hand, and then when it dies, they either draw a card, or, you know, they... Like if you really want to give it a downside, let them impulse. That way they get some card selection to make up for the fact that you got to thought seize them. That wouldn't happen on modern Magic cards, but could be a downside you see on older cards. While we would probably test this if it were a paper card, I would be annoyed about it just because I don't necessarily want our best color to just be getting a premium 3-drop.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Like a generically good premium 3-drop for any version of Black Deck, you know? I think we already have we're not dying for more hand disruption. I know some people are really gung-ho about it, but we're doing fine on hand disruption. Like, this is kind of just the back half of Conceal and Curtains, right? In fact, it even hits for 3 with evasion too, so it's very similar to Conceal and Curtains. But yeah, this isn't doing anything like super cool or unique or something that we really need in our card pool for us to actually test this card out, though some people were obviously like, well, but the card's really good, aren't you going to play it? It's like, yeah, no. we're not super interested.
Alchemy cards have to cross a pretty interesting design hurdle or like design hole for us to try and test them. Like Talion's Throne Guard, I think, is the only one that really has.
Yeah, Talion's Throne Guard is filling a hole for us that we don't have with like an actual Venser or something like that. So we are okay playing something like that. The last kind of this could just be a paper card is Sprout Watch Dryad, which is 1 GG for a 3/3 rare Dryad. And basically at the beginning of each combat, it gains the keyword abilities of any creatures that you have in hand. So if you have a creature in hand with flying, it gains flying. Same for Hexproof, Lifelink, Vigilance.
Yeah, all of the standard like evergreen combat keywords.
Yep, and the only thing making this an alchemy card is the fact that you don't actually have to reveal the creatures in your hand. Though, I don't know, like, the upside of that is that you're not giving your opponent information, right? But at the same time, if my opponent controls a Sprout Watch Dryad, and they go to combat and it suddenly gains indestructible, like, I feel like I could narrow down the possible indestructible creatures my opponent could have in their hand anyway.
In the entire format?
Sure. Maybe if it gains vigilance, I'd be like, ooh, they have a vigilance creature, but I don't know what it is, because everything has vigilance in the set. But, like, just reveal the cards in your hand and make this a cool paper card. I actually would
still have a minor problem with it as a paper card, simply because this is a white text box on a green card, but that's a pretty minor thing. Green gets to do everything in Magic, so that's okay.
They have used this template for green in the past for a couple cards, but...
Okay, yeah. I always call this the Thundering Orator effect, because that's the one that I think of when I think of this effect.
It is a very much white effect, or at least we associate with. In fact, there's another alchemy card that's like Priest of Possibilities or something, where it like reveals the top card of your library and it gains the abilities of the top card of your library. And it's just like a 2-mana 2/2 white thing that kind of does a similar thing. So really reusing that design space in alchemy to get these cards out. But that's going to go ahead and close out the not an alchemy card section, and bring us into our last section, which are the actual, literally offensive cards.
I was going to refer to this as the ninth circle of hell. This is where all of the basement dweller alchemy cards are. This is the worst of the worst, the ones that really just make you do a double take.
Yeah, and so there are 3 cards here. They're all disguise creatures. One of them is Sleuth Instructor, which isn't so much offensive as it is like it reminds me of something I don't like about Murders at Karlov Manor already. But the other 2, this is Rampaging Ursaguana and Rolesque Prime Specimen. Basically what these are gigantic green-based creatures with disguise, but the disguise costs are less than 5 mana. And they offend me so much because let's just say you go into an alchemy queue and you're like, I didn't read the cards, there should be some cool stuff here. You kind of expect that the 5 mana morph rule is still in effect, but because of the existence of these 2 cards specifically, your opponent can completely blow you out because these 2 cards ignore the 5 mana morph rule. Like, Rolesque is a 4/5 flyer that disguises for green-blue. You can play that on turn 3, and then on turn 4, flip it up, boom, 4/5 flyer, eat your morph in combat. The other one, Rampaging Ursaguana, is a 6 mana 4/4 with Trample, Ward 2, and Haste, and it gets +2/+2 for each time the creature attacked this game. So on its own, if you just play it for 6 mana and attack, it's a Colossal Dreadmaw with Haste and Ward 2. Pretty good. But the thing about it is you can play it face down as a morph. You can attack with it a couple times, which kind of stockpiles that ability. And then when you flip it up, it just kind of gains all of that power and toughness at once. So if you go morph, attack with it once, attack with it another time, flip it up after attacking with it twice, it's an 8/8 when it flips face up.
Wait. So this works when it's face down too?
Yes. So if it's face down and it attacks, it won't get +2/+2, but when it's turned face up, it now has that ability and it remembers that it attacked as a morph.
Okay, like, let's be real. Like, just playing this on 3, attacking on turn 4, and then flipping it up is probably going to win you a lot of games then. You're just playing, like, essentially, you're skipping your turn 4, but you just put a 6/6 into play.
Yeah, and I buried the lead that the disguise cost on that creature is 2 GG.
So it curves into itself.
Yes, so you play it on 3, you attack with it, immediately turn it face up. It's a 6/6, Trample, Ward 2, and if it survives to attack again, it'll get another +2/+2. Which, by the way, if you play it on defense, you just flip it. Like, if your opponent has 4 mana, they're not supposed to be able to eat your morph.
Yeah, did we mention the ridiculous amount of value that Rolesque generates in addition to it being just a 4/5 flyer?
Do you want to read Rolesque? I didn't even read it because it just like, oh my god.
As if this creature wasn't egregious enough for flipping up for 2 mana, mind you, to be a 4/5. It also has the text of, whenever Rolesque Prime Specimen or another permanent you control is turned face up, you may pay X. If you do, if X is 1 or more, conjure a duplicate of a random creature card with mana X into your hand. Cloak it. It gains green-blue hybrid. Turn this creature face up for as long as it remains face down.
So, okay, so here, play it out for me. You play Rolesque face down on turn 3. On turn 4, you play blue-green to flip it face up. What happens?
Okay, so then we pay 2. We conjure 1 or 2. You can take your choice. We conjure a random 1 or 2 drop from anywhere in Magic's existence that's on the client. And we place it face down with Ward 2 on it. Then, if Rolesque is face up, we can pay 1 mana to flip the card face up and do this again, except the next turn, we're going to have even more mana, so we get an even bigger creature that we can now flip up for cheap. It chains into itself and creates a never-ending string of value on top of all of these stats.
Yes, not to mention if you already have like a Nervous Gardener face down from your own deck, and you flip that up while Rolesque is in play, you get to do this thing as well. And the secret mode here, you can just play this face up as a 4-mana 4/5 flyer. and like, you don't get to disguise it or ambush or do the disguise thing, but it does still have this ability for other permanents that flip face up.
There's another 4-mana blue-green flyer with a kind of above rate stat line that's pretty good in this format.
Kellen,
what if we just made it bigger?
Yeah, what if we made it gigantic, let you disguise it, and gave it like so much extra value than... Well, Kellen has vigilance, so...
Notably, this also this does some interesting things in the format in terms of stat lines where it blocks Aurelia the Law Above, which is really as close to unblockable as exists in the format.
These are the two that really set me off because they're just blatantly ignoring the kind of design constraints of every other disguise creature in the main set, which leads me to believe that the Alchemy team is just a completely different group of people working on Magic cards.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
I mean, you were watching my game yesterday. I was horribly losing. All I really had on board was Rampaging Ursaguana face down. I attacked with it once, it got bigger. I attacked with it once, it got bigger. So I chipped in 4 damage on my opponent. And then I had a turn where I attacked with it again, and I had a Pyrotechnic Performer face down. Mm-hmm. So I flipped up Pyrotechnic Performer, doned my opponent for 3, and then flipped up Rampaging Ursaguana, doned my opponent for 8 or 10 damage, and then it connected in combat and did 8 or 10 damage, and I was my opponent went from 18 to 0. Yeah. Which maybe that's Pyrotechnic Performer really doing the job there. It kind of
is. I had a similar thing happen where I got domed for 18 by that card. It can lead to some really silly turns.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that you didn't have to work very hard to do it. When it happened to me, my opponent cast multiple pump spells on a Fugitive Codebreaker that had the triggers on the stack. It was a really impressive late game combo turn.
Yeah, the last card in this category is not as offensive. Sleuth Instructor is a 2-mana 3/2 disguise for 2 mana. When it or another permanent you control is turned face up, you seek a non-elephant creature from your library with mana value 3 or less and cloak it. Oh, the ability triggers only once. Okay, so it's not as offensive. So basically you get a one-shot free cloaked creature from your library, but it's always something small. A couple weird things about this is, first off, the set already has a 1 and a white 3/2 elephant rare for that also disguises for 1 and a white. It's or it might disguise for 2 and a white. I don't know, but we already have another elephant with the same exact stat line and mana cost and disguise. It's are we really treading on the same territory? And plus, this is just what's the card? The Night Watch, right? We've complained about it. The Night Watch, which is that 3/2 centaur that dies into a detective, that's kind of cheating the morph rule, right? It's not exactly cheating the morph rule because your opponent's not using it to eat your 2/2, but it is leaving behind value and essentially getting a 2-for-1 for less than 5 mana, which feels not what the morph rule is supposed to represent.
Yeah, it feels like it's skirting the rule. We've had some interesting discussions with the community as to whether they feel because I'm a big believer that it does skirt the rule, and it's it is not a reasonable card to have in the format. Not it's overpowered, unreasonable. It's they said there's a rule in place, and it definitely violates it. So cards like Dog Walker also sort of fall into that same camp where you trade the Dog Walker off and you end up with 2 1/1s. It sort of feels like that same sort of vibe.
Well, the rule itself is basically a morph cannot eat a morph in combat for less than 5 mana. That's the actual literal rule, but I feel the implication or the kind of hidden promise of that rule is that your opponent can't 2-for-1 you or just straight up get an advantage in that exchange for less than 5 mana, which is not how the morphs in this set work. If your opponent flips up a Dog Walker or a Goblin, what's the goblin, the engineer or whatever, and leaves behind a body while trading for your morph, they're ahead of you in that exchange. And it feels that skirts the line a little bit of what's kind of promised with the morph rule. And I know that's not exactly what the morph rule says, but that's what it feels like it should be.
Yeah, it feels like the morph rule is basically any morph trade you take under 5 mana will always be even.
Yes, and it leads to these damned if you do, damned if you don't gotcha situations where once your opponent does hit 5 mana, they could have their Crocodile, or they could have their Offender at Large, but it could also just be a thing that's going to 2-for-1 you. It was something I appreciated about cons is there were not morphs that flipped face up and made tokens and left behind bodies and drew cards and stuff like that. So it was very hard to get a 2-for-1 off of most of the morphs in cons. They just became big creatures. But there's enough of those coupled in with little value morph creatures in Murders at Karlov Manor that makes me kind of like dislike the overall morph design, and Sleuth Instructor kind of fits into that category where it's like, I'm going to be up in this exchange. I'm going to 2-for-1 you by just flipping my morph creature up in combat.
Right, yeah, and because of cloaks, there's also some situations where, like, this is a pretty niche one, but something like Bubble Smuggler, where it gets a value for flipping face up, it does it super cheap, and, just like if you get an actual good 3-drop, sometimes that'll, blow you out at some point later down the road.
Oh, yeah, Bubble Smuggler goes from, like, one of the worst disguise creatures to one of the best when you can, like, actually cloak it. It's insane when you cloak it. I think, blood pressure's pretty high. Sweating a little bit. I feel like we weren't like actually super harsh on this. I feel like we were critical and fair, but that's where we're at with this alchemy set, this most recent alchemy set, and it's a collection of overpowered, overly complicated cards, as well as cards that feel like they could have been released as interesting paper cards and were just repurposed as alchemy cards for the sake of making cards. That's kind of the bottom line, is like, it feels like people are making digital only cards because they have a cool idea and they want to make digital only cards. They're not serving a purpose. They're not making the limited format better. They're not improving a constructed format. They're not particularly interested in cube cards. Like, we're just making cards because we can make cards. And I don't know that that's like a very good use of the alchemy team's design space, like when they could be improving the client.
I assume that the alchemy team is the one intern who also does the debugs for the client.
It could be one person. But the thing is, they commission art for these cards, right? Like,
no, they don't. No, they do not. These are leftover arts that they commissioned for other sets. This is also they are not commissioning alchemy art. These are leftovers that they didn't use in the main set.
That could be true. That could be true. I mean, there's just nothing to be excited about from this batch, is the unfortunate thing. Usually there's one or two that I'm like, oh, I'll add these to this cube, or I'll add these to this cube. But this one just, it hit me different. It felt infuriating for some reason. A lot of that is centered on these like morphs that are straight up breaking an established rule. But then the rest of it is just like the uncommons, like the Thopterist we opened up with, just insane for an uncommon, and like probably ruins any format where you encounter that card.
This one I think just hit different because also I think maybe it felt like more people were playing this alchemy set as opposed to some of the previous ones where it didn't feel like, for whatever reason, people like decided to play this and give it a shot, and it like kind of blew up in their face. It felt like just the overall power level felt really cranked on a lot of these cards, even relative to some of the other alchemy cards in terms of like how they impact limited.
Yeah, I'm not sure why I brought it upon myself to actually try out alchemy, but can't say I enjoyed it. As someone who likes Murders at Karlov Manor a decent amount, I cannot say that anything here made me feel like it improved the format, which leads me to believe that like these cards just don't improve any format that they're really a part of.
Yeah, that's my general consensus with this match as well. They're just not interested.
Well, they're going to keep pumping them out, but that's probably a good spot to close out for us. Again, bonus episode. I'm not going to go into all the final details, but we will give alchemy its due at some point in an episode with all three hosts. We'll get Chris in on it, and we'll have more positive things to say there. About alchemy cards we like and designs we think are useful, though I imagine despite our best efforts, we're probably going to devolve into some sort of like bashing of cards and designs in that episode too, but we'll try to rein it in. We'll try to bring some positivity to the podcast. We'll address that in a future episode, but for now, just suffice to say, not a huge fan of what was going on in the most recent batch.